Thank you everyone for coming out today. It's made all of us as staff and volunteers really smile seeing this turnout, so thank you for coming here today. My name's Naomi. I'm the curator of collections here, and it's my pleasure today to introduce you to our speaker, BonSue. BonSue's been a docent in our House of Seven Gables for many years now, and we really appreciate her coming here and telling the 20 ghosts of the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel. Just a little bit about BonSue. She moved to Florida about 4 decades ago, and she has been highly involved in the Bel Air area, as well as the efforts to save the Bellevue Biltmore. So a lot of her presentation today comes from research and interviews that she did in that effort to preserve the hotel. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to her, and let's give her.
Hi, and welcome to the February 2018 Speaking of History presentation here at Heritage Village. My name is BonSue Brandvik, and for those of you who are not familiar with my writing, you might wonder, what do I mean by the 20 real ghosts of the Bellevue Biltmore? To answer that question, I need to take you back to a point in time when I first became inspired to write a series of novels that are set in the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel. That year was 2004. That's when I learned the Bellevue Biltmore was in danger of being demolished by a different developer who wanted to build condos and replace it that way. Local residents at that time were up in arms, demanding that the hotel be saved. Up until then, I'd only been to the Bellevue Biltmore for weddings and their legendary Mother's Day brunch and things like that. So I decided to take the tour of the hotel on my own to find out what all the fuss was about. At that time, I already knew a few, basic historic facts about the place. For instance, I knew that the Bellevue Hotel opened on January 4th, 1897, and that it had been founded by one of Florida's founding fathers, Henry B. Plant. I also knew that over time, the size of the hotel had grown to a whopping 820,000 square feet. And that didn't include all the tunnels and the rooms and the shops and everything in the basement. I knew the Bellevue Biltmore was considered to be the largest occupied wooden structure in the United States and possibly the world. I knew most of the hotel was built out of the heart of the southern loblolly pine tree, which, for those of you who are not in Florida, that's a prized tree here because once the tree gets to be about 40 years old, the inside of the tree is so dense with sap, not even termites can penetrate it. And of course, sap petrifies. So over time, that made that hotel, the main bones, we call it, the hotel, as strong almost as stone. I decided to begin my solo tour in the elegant promenade corridor, the length of which was lit by chandeliers attached to a high arched ceiling. The promenade corridor was the main passage in the original hotel, so it was constructed to be wide enough that 2 ladies wearing hoop skirts could pass one another comfortably. The walls of the hallway were covered with historic photographs depicting the evolution of the hotel, its amenities, pastime diversions. Some of the photographs immortalized a few of the hotel's more famous guests, and that included notables from every single generation, including the Rockefeller, DuPont, and Vanderbilt families, Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Al Capone, Sam Snead, Babe Ruth, you can tell what I like to eat, Babe Ruth and Joe DiMaggio, Charlie Daniels, Billy Joel, and Christy Brinkley actually honeymooned there. Even heads of states, the Duke of Windsor, Margaret Thatcher, and United States presidents Carter, Ford, Bush Sr., and Obama stayed there. Even though I was just beginning my tour of the hotel, I was already awestruck. to be thinking that well over 100 years after the hotel was built, I was walking on the exact same floorboards where Henry Plant, his wife Margaret, and all of those famous people had once strolled. I found myself gawking at everything, from those incredible photos on the walls to the remarkable details of the 30-inch carved crown molding. I was amazed at the sense of history that seemed to permeate the walls, and by the profound thought that I was walking in the footsteps of time. As I walked further down the promenade corridor, each room seemed to call to me. One room boasted a ceiling of backlit Tiffany glass panels and interior matching windows. Another featured an incredibly high ceiling filled with twinkling white lights. Another showed off intricate white wrought iron gates at its entrance. It used to be the speakeasy. At both ends of the main corridor were beautiful boxed spiral staircases leading to the guest rooms far above. And in contrast, there were several extremely narrow employee entrance doors that led down wooden steps to the tunnels where their work areas were. I stopped to admire 3 tiny phone booths. One was installed in the 1920s, right after coin-operated phones became a thing, right? The other 2 were installed during World War II, when over 3,000 Army Air Corps cadet soldiers occupied the hotel. I could easily envision dozens of men standing in line on Sundays waiting to call home to talk to their families. I marveled at the way each generation seemed to have made its own mark on the hotel. Past generations not only made physical changes to the hotel, but thousands of them left echoes of themselves there as well, and I could just feel them there with me. One thought kept echoing in my head, and you know what that is if only these walls could talk, what stories they would tell, right? And that's when it hit me. I could tell their stories. By combining the actual history of the Bellevue Biltmore Resort with fictional spirits from past generations, I could bring the history of the hotel back to life. And by featuring spirits from different decades in each novel, I could preserve the entire glorious hotel's history. I also realized that while lives, lifestyles, technology, laws, all those things have changed tremendously over time, people's desires and their motivations have changed very little. Therefore, I decided to use my present-day characters to demonstrate that some of the wisdom garnered by former generations is still quite relevant today. Now, needless to say, when I left the hotel that day, I immediately joined the ranks of the people determined to save the Bellevue Biltmore from demolition. Now, one visit to the Bellevue Biltmore might have inspired me to write the series, but for my stories to ring true, I knew the historic facts that were contained within my stories had to ring true, or at least be plausible. That took a lot of research, okay? So I learned that not too long before the Bellevue Biltmore was built, this part of Florida was mostly still untamed and considered to be of little or no value whatsoever. You couldn't drive a buggy anywhere without getting your wheels stuck in that sugar sand or thick brush or swampy land. And the water was too shallow off of Clearwater Beach to bring big ships anywhere close. Plus, even after the wars with the local Indians had come to an end, this area still had more than its share of cattle rustling, gunfights in the streets, and farmers had a terrible time coaxing anything to grow other than citrus fruit and some nuts. Additionally, the hot, humid summers here, which lasted the majority of the year, resulted in high mortality rates, both from the heat and from mosquito-borne illnesses. I started to develop a new respect for visionary Henry B. Plant, who saw past all those negatives. He believed that if he built a magnificent winter resort on the bluff in Bel Air, which wasn't called Bel Air yet, people would come here and they would discover the tropical delights of Upper Pinellas County. I took several guided tours of the hotel. I was that person who questioned the docent about everything on the tours. I read everything I could find about the Plant family and the history of the hotel. I learned that Henry Plant moved to Florida in the year 1851 because his first wife, Ellen Blackstone had contracted tuberculosis, and the warm, moist air would help extend her lifetime. That was shortly after the birth of their son, Morton Plant, a name we all know around this area. After her death in 1861, Henry poured himself into his shipping business. He amassed a fortune during the Civil War, transporting goods and payroll for both the Confederates and the Union. That was some smooth business dealing there. All right, in 1863, he met Margaret Lowman Plant, who would become his second wife a decade later in 1873. With Margaret at his side, Henry continued to expand and operate his railroad, hoping to eventually link the Atlantic with the west coast of the Panhandle. Henry Plant came under influence of writers like Harriet Beecher Stowe, who began to encourage people to visit Florida not because they were sick, but as tourists, inviting them to come see a paradise of palm trees and colorful flowers and interesting birds and animals and beautiful waterways, including rivers in the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic. By 1884, Plant's railroad ran from New York all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, and passengers could ride the entire distance without changing trains. That was a big deal. Okay? But he realized there were only a very few hotels in Florida that would meet the demands of these wealthy tourists, and none of them were in Upper Pinellas County. I discovered that one of the reasons the hotel, the Bellevue Biltmore, became so influential in the growth of this area is that Henry Plant was one of the first hoteliers to actually understand the concept of total package tourism. It became the basis for the genius of what Henry Plant would later refer to as the Plant system. He built railroad tracks to the docks where the large steamships were docked, so he could transfer goods from there right onto the rail cars. He built oyster shell roads between the rail stations and the shops so that his wagons could move from there without breaking their wheels. Something I wouldn't have thought of. He also built railroad links to and from all of his hotels so that wealthy guests could travel in comfort without having to change even modes of transportation once they rolled right up to his hotel. His most elite guests even got the luxurious option of traveling the entire way in their own private Pullman boxcars. Henry Plant didn't stop there. He was one of the first ones to put restaurants and shops inside of his hotel and at various other points on the hotel property. He understood the difference between regular hotels and first-class accommodations was managing that illusion of perfection for as long as possible. He built tunnels throughout the basement to accommodate the needs of his workers while they could do their work without being seen by the guests. That was a concept, by the way, used by Walt Disney years later when he built the Magic Kingdom. Henry Plant also understood the value of providing entertainment and activities for his guests, including balls and concerts and dances and hunting and fishing and racing, and of course this is Florida, so golf. Okay? And most of all, he understood that by providing all of these things, more wealthy people would want to stay at his hotels, and the more money they spent would wind up in his own pocket. When Henry's son, Morton Plant, inherited the Hotel Bellevue just a few years after it opened, he added to the hotel's influence by building an additional wing on the hotel. He also started letting some of his wealthiest clients build kitchenless cottages on the property in exchange for 4 years of free winter residency there. The wealthiest guests liked this arrangement because servants could be kept on hand, and the Plants made money because the guests and the servants still had to take all of their meals in the hotel's restaurant. After 4 years, the ownership of those 12 cottages reverted to the hotel, and thereafter, owners only had the first right of refusal to rent their cottage every season. This concept, by the way, later developed into the timeshare industry. I also learned that before the event of the passenger elevator, the higher the floor in the hotel, the less desirable it was. Can you imagine climbing all those stairs in a ball gown? As a matter of fact, the 5th floor was deemed suitable only as quarters for hotel management and as little rooms for servants and nannies who were traveling with the hotel guests. When I studied local history, I couldn't believe what an influential role the Bellevue Biltmore played in the entire development of this area. First of all, the entire town of Bel Air was literally, and I don't use that word all the time, literally built around the hotel. The town was named by Henry Platt, the town of Bel Air, the town with beautiful, healthy air, just as he had named the Hotel Bellevue for its beautiful view. The hotel also served as the fire department, the post office, the telegraph office, the telephone switchboard for the whole new town of Bel Air and for the budding Clearwater Harbor, which of course eventually became the city of Clearwater and the governing hub of all Pinellas County. Morton added to the plant legacy by providing a $100,000 endowment for the first local hospital, which was built within walking distance of the Bellevue Biltmore. In 1920, following the death of Morton Platt, John McKinty Bowman added the Bellevue Hotel to his luxury hotel chain and renamed it the Bellevue Biltmore, which people were furious about. Now they fight for the Biltmore name. In 1924, he added a south wing to the hotel, bringing the number of total rooms in the hotel to 425. 380 of them were guest rooms. The more I learned about the history of the Bellevue Biltmore, the more fascinated I became. I explored just about every nook and cranny of the entire place. In addition to guided tours and my library research, I took some unsanctioned tours of the Bellevue Biltmore, including the 5th floor, which had been closed to the public since the 1940s, as well as the basement, and I tried to imagine what it would have been like to work there and stay there. I spent time exploring the corners of the underground tunnels. I examined the railroad tracks and pictured how many loads of luggage and supplies and even illegal liquor the workers had been bringing in and out on those very tracks. I examined some of the old stone ovens, and I thought about how many dozens and dozens of baked goods were made there every single day. Can you imagine how great that basement must have smelled? I studied what was left of the old boiler and thought how it provided hot water to the entire hotel when it first opened in 1897. What a marvel it must have been. I said what was left because I envisioned soldiers there in World War II cutting the pipes off that same boiler, which had become obsolete. And that's when the scrap iron drives were helping the war effort, so they took off the pipes for that. They pulled up the railroad tracks from around the hotel for that same reason during the war effort. I sat by the giant ice keep in the basement, which is kind of like an indoor swimming pool, the size of it, and pictured men cutting huge blocks of ice down into sizes that could be used in the ice boxes in the kitchen upstairs in the kitchen. I stared at the old wooden steps inside the hidden servant staircases and wondered how many feet have to climb on steps before they actually wear grooves in them. Think about that. How many sheets have been washed in that mess of laundry downstairs and carried up those very stairs? In the St. Andrew's pub downstairs, I wished I could have listened to the conversations of the men of the day back then. Playing cards, drinking that Caribbean rum, and smoking their Cuban cigars. Wouldn't you love to be the fly on the wall there? I imagined what it was like for the seamstresses who had toiled away in the basement dress shop, turning out incredible ball gowns for the wealthy guests to wear during their winter stays at the hotel. I climbed way up into the attic, and I wondered how long it had been since someone else had been there, maybe oiling the wheels of the freight lift, or maybe stuffing newspaper in between those hard pine beams to serve as insulation at that time. I discovered while I was up there that the southern loblolly pine beams that were used to construct the majority of the hotel were, for the most part, still in perfect condition. I also learned about the changes each owner made to the hotel over time, and I collected stories from anyone who had one to tell. You can find more information on all of this on my website, by the way. I've left my business cards in your seats if you're interested, but for now, let's suffice to say, my journey with the Bellevue Biltmore was just getting started. As I mentioned, back in 2004, the town of Bel Air was up in arms, determined to protect the incredible Bellevue Biltmore Hotel from demolition. And in 2005, we all thought we'd succeeded. The town added a historic preservation ordinance to its charter specifically designed to protect the hotel from demolition. The hotel was purchased by an investment group, and on the last day of May 2009, it was closed in order to undergo a total renovation. I was actually the very last person to check out of the hotel, and I had an agreement with the managers that I would be the very first one to check in after the renovation. I established a website to record my journey as a budding novelist, along with the journey of the hotel's total renovation. I started publishing newsletters to chronicle both adventures, and I began to write the first book in the series. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with my writing, the novels, The Spirits of the Bellevue Biltmore, are part real history, part fictitious history, part paranormal mystery, and part romance. In the beginning of each book, a troubled female guest checks into the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel, and when the guest goes to sleep, spirits of the hotel visit her dreams, taking her back in time to share their memories. Because each guest's problems are quite different from one another, their problems resonate with spirits from different eras of the hotel's past, allowing me to highlight interesting slices of the hotel's history, while at the same time embracing the concept that present generations can learn from generations past. Throughout the course of each novel, the hotel guest must figure out what the spirits are trying to teach her and how lessons from the past can actually create a better future for herself. So, before long, people from around the world start sending me emails when they hear about this book coming out, telling me about their own special memories of the Bellevue Biltmore, and since my website said I was writing about spirits at the Bellevue Biltmore, several of those emails recounted paranormal experiences and asked if the ghosts that they had seen when they were there were going to be in my books. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. Sadly, I want to tell you about what happened to the hotel. The real estate market crashed in the United States, leading to the worst economic times here since the Great Depression. When that happened, the hotel renovation fell apart. Because the hotel had already been gutted in preparation for that renovation, they couldn't just simply postpone the renovation and reopen the hotel. So my goal switched from sharing journeys with the hotel to trying to save it once again. I published the first book in the Bellevue Biltmore Spirits of the Bellevue Biltmore series in the hope that it would find its way into the hands of someone who would be willing to invest the $100 million necessary to save the iconic structure. Obviously, that didn't happen. The company planning the renovation lost its investors and went bankrupt. The property was sold for the balance on the outstanding mortgage, a mere $8 million for the entire property. The new owner split the property into 3 sections: the golf course, the beach cabana and restaurant, and the hotel property itself, and eventually sold each of those sections to different owners. The company that purchased the hotel section of the property decided to demolish the hotel and replace it with 4 condo towers and dozens of townhomes. So in 2016, while we sadly watched, all the modern sections of the hotel were demolished, and afterward, the older section of the hotels were deconstructed board by board so that that incredibly valuable loblolly pine and all of the other amazing features of the hotel's architecture and construction could be harvested and sold as salvage. Several years ago, 6 of the original 12 magnificent cottages that Morton Plan allowed to be built on the property were demolished in order to make room for other private homes and condo towers. And then one of the cottages burned down. But the current owner demolished 4 of the last 5 cottages that exist last year. Currently, only one of the cottages remains: the Eastgate Cottage, which thankfully was turned into a private residence several decades ago, so it should stay with us. Now, to pacify distraught preservationists like me, the new owner did agree to save a tiny portion of the once grand Bellevue Biltmore Hotel. He carved out the original lobby section, 36,000 of the hotel's 820,000 square feet, and he moved it to a more convenient location on the property, which is kind of cool, and that, if you want to see that move, it's also on my website. But he plans to incorporate that little preserved section into the design of a small inn. The rest of the hotel, all of its magnificent ballrooms, the amazing architecture, the fascinating tunnels, that beautiful promenade corridor, along with all of its historic ambiance, is all gone. Sadly, no future generations will be able to feel that the echoes of history as they walk down the wonderful corridors of the Bellevue Biltmore like I did. While I will always believe The demolition of the hotel is a tremendous loss to this area. It caused me to be more committed than ever to preserve the hotel's history in my books. And while people still connect with me about the hotel and tell me about their memories there, the most frequent question they ask these days is, what happens to all those ghosts that were haunting the hotel, right? I will answer a fictitious answer in my fourth book, Nails, but for right now, I'm going to tell you what we know. Most fans of historic hotels and who follow ghosts and things like that will agree that guests and workers leave echoes of themselves that become part of a hotel's ambiance. When those echoes are heard or seen or felt or photographed years or decades or even centuries later, we call that a haunting. If you experience this phenomenon, it's called a paranormal encounter or a ghost sighting. Right after I established that first website, when people started emailing me about their ghostly encounters at the hotel, I found it interesting that people use eerily similar terms to describe encounters with the spirit realm. Initially, a spine-tingling sensation is felt. You might get goosebumps. There's an instant awareness that something is present that just doesn't fit into your normal realm of reference. There is an instant rush of adrenaline as your fight or flight instinct is awakened. The surrounding air might change abruptly, often becoming cold or wet or breezy. The ghost sighting or paranormal encounter occurs in an instant, and it often disappears just that fast. The memory of the encounter, however, will remain crystal clear, even long after the experience is over. And logic and rational thought, you can apply it all you want, but there's not going to make that lingering, uneasy feeling go away. You know you've experienced something. Now, as I mentioned, my novels mix actual historic events with my imaginary world of spirits that haunt the hotel. So when I first started writing my book, I didn't think the hotel was haunted. I only intended to use spirits as a way of demonstrating the wisdom and the courage of women who either worked at the hotel or stayed at the hotel long ago, and I wanted to honor them. Also, in the world that I created for my characters in my novels, spirits and ghosts are not the same thing. Spirits are souls who decided to step off the lighted path for whatever reason. They still embody their memories, their personalities, everything that is an aspect of their human self. They just don't have a body. Ghosts, on the other hand, are created when only part of the soul abandons the lighted path. Okay, so part of their soul remains in the spirit realm while the rest of it goes down the lighted path. In my world, ghosts represent the evil part of a person, that part that was most afraid that judgment awaited at the other end of that lighted tunnel. So in my world, ghosts are pretty much evil. All right, now, after a while, I realized that a few of the emails I received about these real ghost sightings sounded quite similar to one to another. When I began to compare encounters, I was amazed that several people had unknowingly experienced and reported almost identical paranormal encounters or ghost sightings. To date, a total of 20 paranormal encounters has been reported to me by more than one person. And remember, this does not include the countless photographs that people have sent me with the orbs, or that's the little dots that might be in a picture. And in the ghost hunting community, they claim those might be reflections of spirits caught on film. The 20 ghosts of the Bellevue Biltmore that I talk about are stories where either an apparition appeared or a phenomenon was felt so strongly that it made a permanent impression on the person who had the encounter. And it was distinctive enough that I could tell it from something. It wasn't one who walked down a hall and got a spooky feeling or something along those lines. It was distinctive enough that I could put it in a category and say, yep, I've heard that before. Okay, now, I tried to research these stories, but I quickly discovered that task was hopeless. For one thing, deaths at most prestigious hotels were kept quiet, because the concern was that the superstitions of the time would really hurt business. So they covered it up whenever possible. For another thing, newspapers back then didn't have obituaries, and they didn't report a death unless that individual was either very famous or died in a very extraordinary way. Therefore, I am going to be the first to admit that I have no evidence other than personal testimony that any of these phenomena ever occurred. But whether you choose to believe these ghost stories or not, no one can deny that they have become a part of the history of the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel. Therefore, when I started writing the second book, I decided to start incorporating some of these stories. Some of them are told to people as, hey, did you hear about? And other times I designed a character based around the ghost story. So those are included in my story. Now with that said, it's time to meet the 20 real ghosts of the Bellevue Biltmore. The first of these stories I call The Bride. Now to me it seems like every historic hotel has a bride who offed herself at some point, right? And the Bellevue Biltmore is no exception to that. But still, reports are frequent enough by hotel staff that I need to include this. And the story goes that a couple was to marry in town and spend their honeymoon at the Bellevue Biltmore Hotel. The woman's fiance was a local doctor, and unfortunately was killed in a car accident while visiting patients the day before their wedding. The grief-stricken woman came to the hotel, dressed up in her wedding gown, and flung herself headfirst off the balcony of the 4th floor. She was said to haunt the hallway of the fourth floor, and people could see her floating around in her wedding gown and her veil. Now the next one is the $1 Million Pearls. Now this is perhaps the most famous ghost story involving the hotel. One year after Henry Plant's son, Morton Plant, was widowed, he met the much younger May Caldwell Manwaring, Maisie. He was so instantly smitten with her beauty that he paid her husband $8 million to divorce her and allow him to adopt their son, Philip. As a wedding gift, Morton gave Maisie the deed to the Plant family home on 5th Avenue in New York. Now, Morton didn't mind Maisie spending a lot of money, which she did. But when she wanted him to buy her a set of perfectly matched natural pearls for a cool $1.2 million, he put his foot down and said no. Determined to have those pearls, Maisie decided to trade her wedding gift for them, the house on 5th Avenue. The jeweler was interested in moving his business to a more prominent location in New York, so he accepted the deal and converted the house into his jewelry shop. Today, it remains the House of Cartier Jewels on 5th Avenue in New York. After only 4 years of marriage, Morton Plant died, and Maisie inherited the lion's share of his estate. The remainder was divided equally between her son Philip and Morton's son Henry. Maisie lived long enough to remarry twice more, a total of 4 marriages in her lifetime, and there's evidence that her precious pearls were sold at an auction following her death for a fraction of their value, because by that time, natural pearls were not as valuable because we have cultured pearls on the market. But the hotel staff claims that she still wanders the halls of the Bellevue Biltmore looking for her pearls. It's said that she would pat her throat as if she was trying to stay. She was searching for the pearls that she loved so much. Now the next story I call Fresh Air. One of the windows on the 4th floor, overlooking the then swimming pool, used to open by itself. A previous owner claimed that it was Henry Plant opening it for a breath of fresh air, which is of course very doubtful, but there are a couple interesting things about this story. First, that window was part of the hotel that had been closed off for years. No one was permitted up there. Second, when the workers got tired of closing and relocked the window, they decided to nail it shut. A couple weeks later, the window reopened by itself. Upon investigation, the perfectly formed nails were found lying on the windowsill. The next one I call Men and Loose Women Only. The men's billiard room and pub downstairs was part of the original hotel. It's said that while loose women frequented the billiard room frequently, moral, upstanding ladies were not allowed. Several women who took the historic tour over the years claimed that they felt unwelcome the moment they entered that pub. This threatening presence was never reported by men or by women that we shall say were more gregarious. And for some reason, I never felt anything when I went in there either. I don't know. Now, the next story I want to tell you about is Have You Seen My Folks? And it is the story that actually started my collection. To date, I have had 6 reports about this ghost. Most claim they have seen the full-bodied apparition of a 7- or 8-year-old boy dressed in clothing from around the 1930s. He's spoken to several guests, claiming to have drowned in the old pool, which by the time we really started noticing, it had been covered over and made into tennis courts a few decades back. He tended to haunt the indoor swimming pool area. Some adults felt a great sad presence before they saw him. And more than one child became terrified and refused to go in the water. How many kids do you know refused to go in a swimming pool, right? But they wanted to go to the outside pool, not the indoor one. He was also seen or felt in a few rooms on the 1st floor and even made contact with a few ghost tours up on the 5th floor. Sometimes he asked children if they wanted to play. Other times he warned people to stay away from the water. But in every single contact, this little boy told people he was looking for his parents and asked if they'd seen them. Now, the next story I call Nanny Wants Privacy. As I mentioned earlier, when the hotel was first built, there was only one freight lift, and it was operated using a motorized pulley system. Because the stairs were difficult to negotiate, especially in long skirts, the highest floor had low ceilings, and it was considered unsuitable for guest rooms. So some of the hotel's management was housed on that floor, and also wealthy guests could rent small vacant rooms for servants or nannies who were wintering with the family there in Florida. Even in later years, the passenger elevators didn't go all the way up to the 5th floor, so it remained closed to the public. However, a few rooms were converted into offices for hotel staff. A few workers, as well as a couple sneaky guests, believed they might have run into the nanny or the servant wanting their privacy up there. They said they would suddenly get a chill and feel as if an annoyed woman was watching them. She wanted them to leave her room. They said when they backed out of the room, they noticed that the chill went away and the bad feeling went away. Now, what's really interesting to me about that is, although this was a prime location on the 5th floor, no office was ever built in that room. Okay? The next one I call Not Your Typical Soldier's Death. The original pulley freight lift in the hotel was replaced by a mechanical freight elevator in the 1920s. Now, this is one of those old-fashioned kind of elevators with the gate that pulls closed, and you've got to stop it when it's level with the floor of the hotel. And while the hotel was occupied by the Army Air Corps during World War II, one young soldier fell to his death when he accidentally stepped into the open elevator shaft without realizing the cab wasn't there. Hotel workers claimed he haunted the vicinity of the freight elevator on all the floors. Sometimes people could hear a man talking in the elevator shaft, but upon closer inspection, they found no one there. Other times, workers said they saw the young soldier or felt his presence so intensely that even big, strong men could barely wait to get off of that elevator. Okay, now, at the Bellevue Biltmore, the old saying, children should be seen and not heard, seems to have operated in reverse. Over the years, many guests complained that they heard the sounds of children running and laughing and playing in the hallways late in the evening, obviously unsupervised. But neither the hotel guests or security ever found a single child. As soon as a door was opened or someone peeked around that hallway, the sounds immediately stopped. They simply vanished. I like to think the children are still running and playing and laughing wherever they are. The next one I call the disgruntled worker. As I mentioned, when the Bellevue first opened, the basement held a bakery and a giant ice keep and laundry and a seamstress shop. Well, it also had, and all the paths were railroad tracks, and they would use those railroad pump cars, and that way they could transport the luggage or the supplies to whatever part of the hotel was closest to one of the servants' staircases and carry it up from there. Many folks walking on that historic tour were walking on those steps after the military had removed all those tracks during World War II, and they claimed that they felt the presence of an angry man in those tunnels, and there was not a doubt in their mind that he was saying, "Get out of my way." Okay? The next one I call You're It, which also happens in the basement. Children of hotel guests often had a blast. They hid from their nannies in that hotel basement. You can imagine how much fun it would be. They enjoyed playing hide and seek and tag with their friends down there. And this could be the basis of several reports I've received from people who claim that an unseen presence tapped them on the shoulder, the hip, the back of their legs while they were touring or traversing the basement tunnels. Those who experienced this phenomenon said the touch was not unlike that of a child. When this happened to a few people, they had the presence of mind to immediately turn around and take a picture, and they were never surprised because every time there were orbs in the photograph. Okay. The next one I call the shy watcher, or maybe the children's temptress. Hotel guests report seeing a ghostly young girl with light hair and a huge bow on her hair. She would appear on the 4th floor landing, and she watched them walk up the stairs, but she always vanishes before they reach the top of the stairs. This may be the same girl that's been reported to me that's sometimes seen on the basement stairs, in the tunnels, the billiard room, and outside a few storage rooms, because several times when upset parents demanded to know why their children had wandered off, you can imagine how scary that would be when your child wanders off in a place as big as the Bellevue Biltmore. They would claim that a little girl waved at them, coaxing them to come play. And when they followed her, she'd run off and hide. Perhaps she's still trying to play hide and seek even now. The next one is called the Tocobaga Indian story. It's one of my favorite sightings. It's a large wolf-like creature it witnessed in the basement tunnels. On the bluff of the hotel, where the hotel was built, used to be home to an ancient tribe called the Tocobaga Indians. Now, many ancient burial mounds have been discovered in the area, so some speculate the hotel might have been built on top of one or more of these burial mounds, keeping in mind that we didn't appreciate the Indian history back then. We would plow that down and build the hotel. So witnesses, including the hotel manager, told me that they've seen the beast, and it's much too large to be confused with a dog or a coyote or anything like that. And this particular dog would shapeshift into an upright mass before disappearing. So who knows? Perhaps the ghost of an Indian, along with his animal spirit guide, are still visiting his ancestors there. Okay. The next story is stage left. Now, there were 2 backstage dressing rooms for people performing on the stage of the Starlight Ballroom. At times, actors who were performing for consecutive nights there were allowed to stay in the dressing room on a little cot as a perk. Apparently, the ghost of a young starlet liked that place really well, and she refuses to leave even now. Okay? She used to lock the door, and workers would have to go find the key and unlock it again. They tried to block the door open with a chair, and then when they returned, they found the door was locked again with the chair inside the room. To solve this ongoing problem, one of the guys who was involved in maintenance eventually took the door off and set it beside the door, and that's where it stayed. Okay, the next one is called Too Many Cooks in the Kitchen. Workers claim a long-departed kitchen supervisor watched over their shoulders as they worked, and often let them feel his disapproval. Cold blasts of air would hit them, even though there were no windows in that kitchen. Other times, the fluorescent lights, which were suspended from the very high ceiling by long chains, would begin to sway and flicker. Other times, work tables would actually move on their own accord. One worker talked to me, and she had been making a salad on a long preparation table, and all of a sudden the entire bowl, the salad, everything was swept right off the end of the table. She ran screaming from the kitchen and refused to work there. She was able to transfer to another part of the hotel, and she said, "I never stepped foot in the kitchen again." Right? On the 5th floor is probably the scariest of all of the reports. Several people claim they've been terrified by an ominous presence on the 5th floor that exudes an aura of pure evil. In each report, this ghost struck fear into the hearts of those who experienced it. They say they were suddenly overwhelmed by the need to escape the area as fast as they could. They felt like they were in grave danger. Now, some claim to have glimpsed a shadowy figure following them as they exited the area as fast as they could, appearing in mirrors and windows along the way. Now, I can empathize with people who felt that because I felt this once myself. I had snuck up to the 5th floor with a couple of friends to watch the sunset over the Intercoastal Waterway. I had a flashlight with me. I had done it several times. Well, not if you're management, but I had done that, and I wasn't worried about being up there. My friends had just begun to wander down the hall to the right, and something caught out of the corner of my eye to the left. I decided to investigate for a moment, and I headed down that dark hallway. Although I saw nothing in the darkness, the hairs on my body suddenly stood on end. I felt like an antelope that had just been cut from the protective herd. Every instinct I possessed told me I was in mortal danger. I turned and I ran back down the hallway as fast as I could go, but even after I caught up with my friends, I didn't feel safe. That sense of impending doom didn't leave me until we had scurried down the stairs and we were back among the world of the living again, and even then I was watching over my shoulder. Now, that never happened to me again. I did return to the 5th floor. I've been up there several times after that, but I will admit I never went up there for another sunset, and I never went up there after dark again. Okay. The next story is the shiny white lady, and many people, including workers at the golf course next door, complained, claimed that they've seen a white, shimmery form of a lady with long hair, and some people, I believe, might call this the happy housekeeper. I'm not sure if it's the same one or not, but this alluring ghost would often be seen near sunset, as if pausing in her chores to take in the sunset over the Intercoastal Waterway. People claim they could clearly see her glowing, feathery form, and sometimes they even claimed that they could make out facial features on the woman, and she was very attractive. Okay, the next one is going to be a little reverse of that, and that's the jealous banshee. In my opinion, next to the demon on the 5th floor, this is the scariest ghost encounter ever reported to me at the Bellevue Biltmore. 2 couples reported this to me. They stayed in different rooms years apart. The only commonality they have was they were there on their honeymoon. Something woke them up in the middle of the night, and when they opened their eyes, they discovered a free-floating form hovering over their bed. In one report, when the woman screamed, the banshee screamed right back at her before turning and dove right through the wall. In the other report, as soon as the man of the couple was able to collect himself enough to turn on the light, the banshee shrieked and bolted out through a window. In both reports, the couple spent the rest of the night clinging to one another tighter than they ever had before. Now, the next story is one of my favorites. I call it Dancing Through Eternity. I've had 6 people representing 4 different encounters report this to me, that they suddenly heard old-fashioned music playing in the hotel. When they followed the sound of the music to one of the ballrooms, they saw a couple dancing there dressed in Victorian garb. Now, 3 of these encounters happened during the summer while the hotel was closed. It didn't open year-round until the 1980s. The last one happened after the hotel was closed for renovation, when a worker was there making repairs. Now, upon investigation, they said that the ghosts continued to dance. They didn't seem to mind being seen, but obviously they minded a little bit, otherwise they would have appeared when the hotel was open. It was only when it was closed that they showed up. The 19 is prankster roommates, and there's a few ghosts who seem to enjoy making their presence known by moving things or opening drawers and windows or removing doorknobs or just simply making a lot of noise in your room. Now, I've had a few reports about ghosts who rattled the pipes in the overhead sprinkler system, and one report says that they saw an apparition appear up there as if he was working on the pipes. Anyway, I've collected these into one group that I call the pranksters. Now, when the hotel opened, several rooms shared a bathroom with the neighboring room. I know, wouldn't you love to do that? There was one door open to the hallway, and the other one would open to this short corridor that had the bathroom in it. Now, for the last several decades, of course, we were no longer willing to share a bathroom with our neighbor at the hotel, so they were sold as a suite. One guest room was made into a parlor and the other into the bedroom with the bathroom in between the 2 rooms. Now, one guest told me that she and her husband stayed in one of these suites on the 1st floor, and in the parlor, or the sitting room, was a small writing desk with what we call a belly drawer in the middle. And that belly drawer kept opening up by itself. Her husband was one of those handy types, And he assessed the problem must be that the floor was not level. So he lifted up the front 2 feet of the drawer, put a little block under them, so that now it was leaning against the wall. Problem fixed, right? So that night, they were waked by a rattling in the parlor. They thought somebody was trying to actually come into the door of the parlor, so they got up to investigate. And when they went into the parlor, they discovered the drawer was open again, even though it had done so against the force of gravity. Now, when my husband and I stayed there on the very last weekend the hotel was open, we stayed in a suite just like the one I described, except that it was on the 4th floor. Now, right after we were there for a few minutes, the glass doorknob fell off onto the floor. My husband made a joke. He said, like, well, yeah, this place is seriously ready for renovation at this point if the doorknobs are falling off. But he put it back together, and everything seemed to fit together, and it was fine, so we took off for the activities. Well, when we came back that evening, we were just starting to get into bed when we heard thunk, and it fell on the floor again. That happened one more time where my husband put it back together before we said, you win. You know, we said, and we left the doorknob off for the rest of the visit. Now, if you're thinking, oh, it was just a faulty doorknob, no. Remember, I was the last person to check out of that hotel, and we made sure that doorknob was on there. I went to the furniture auction of the hotel when they were gutting it a few weeks later. I went back to that room just specifically to see if it was a bad doorknob, and the doorknob was still there. It had not fallen off again. So interesting. Now, pranksters never seem to be scary. They just wanted to let you know that they're there, you know. Now, the last story is Welcome to the Bellevue Biltmore, and there's a reason I saved this story for last. When the new lobby was built on the hotel, the section of the lobby that had previously served as a lobby was converted into a large lounge called the Lobby Lounge. It had a massive mahogany bar just inside on the left, and next to it was a small billiards room. Across the spacious room, if you looked straight from the door, you would see one of the elegant box spiral staircases that led up into the room, and right beside it were some stairs that led down to the St. Andrew's Pub. Beyond that was the main corridor called the Promenade Corridor, and beyond that was the Terrace Restaurant. Now, several people report that when they walked through those doors of the old entrance, they felt a sudden chill and a sense that someone was standing to the right of the door. They would stop. They would look, like you always do when you have that sensation somebody's there. And they would turn to each other and wasn't somebody here? And they all agreed, yes, somebody was there. But no one was there now. Now, what's interesting to me about this story is when Henry and Margaret Plant first opened the hotel, they had the railroad coming up. Margaret and sometimes Henry Plant would stand at that entrance and welcome guests to the new hotel as they stepped off of the railroad. Now, what's even more interesting is the fact that out of the entire hotel, this is the only tiny section that will be saved for posterity. So, while I don't know what's going to become of the other ghosts, although I will handle it in my last book, I like to think that Margaret Plant will be able to remain in the hotel greeting people for as long as she wants to. Now, before I conclude my presentation, I want to quickly mention that the first book in my series, The Spirits of the Bellevue Biltmore, is Pearls, and that introduces Margaret Plant, which is the only spirit that goes throughout all the series of books. It also features spirits from the Victorian era. The second book, Ripples, features spirits from the Prohibition era, when the hotel's rail cars were used to smuggle alcohol, and the hotel featured a not-so-secret speakeasy in this area. Both of those books are currently available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. The third book in the series, called Redemption, involves spirits of soldiers who lived at the Bellevue Biltmore during World War II. I know this is late. It was supposed to be due at the beginning of the year, and hopefully it will be available within the next few months. It's in processing now. The Spirits of the Bellevue Biltmore series will conclude with book 4, which I will call Nails, and that storyline will feature spirits of Florida when the pioneers built the original hotel, along with the workers involved in the present-day demolition of the hotel. Now, it's my sincere hope that my novels will keep the memory of the hotel alive and make sure that future generations know the impact the Bellevue Biltmore had on the growth of this entire area. I'll close my presentation on that note, and I'll be happy to answer questions and autograph copies of my books for anybody if interested. So, thank you. Thank you. Anybody have a question?
We're from Asheville, and they're the named Biltmore is associated with the Vanderbilt family. And I was wondering
What connection?
yeah, with the Biltmore.
The question was, what connection is there with the Biltmore estate in Asheville? And the connection is that when John McKenty Bowman wanted to build a hotel, he wanted to make it the most exclusive hotels in the world. And what he did was he wrote a letter to the Vanderbilt family, and he asked if he could use the Biltmore because he knew that that Biltmore estate immediately brought this palace to mind. And they gave him permission, provided that they would always be that kind of a hotel. And so he actually built most of the hotels in the Biltmore chain. Only 5 hotels in the whole world already matched his level of expectations, so they could absorb the name, and the Bellevue Biltmore was one of those 5. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes? The hotel was a seasonal hotel until 1985. Until then, it only opened for the winter season, and what they would do is all the workers would be put on to Henry Plant's Railroad, and they went up to the Grand Hotel, a lot of them in Grand Hotel, and other ones to Virginia, so that they were only open during the summers. So the workers worked year-round, but this hotel would be closed for the whole summer because before air conditioning, nobody wanted to stay there during the summer. In the 85, it opened year-round.
Are the tunnels structurally still there?
No, I'm sorry to say that they filled in the tunnels and they will be covering over them with towers. I tried very hard to get them to recreate at least a sample of the tunnels under the little hotel part they saved, but it was cost prohibitive, so they're not going to do that. So unfortunately, we've got pictures and memories, and that's all we get from those tunnels. Okay, did you have a secondary question?
You had previously said that they were going to redo the ice cream shop.
Yes.
Where are they going to do that?
In the new section of the hotel. The only thing that's going to be about it, they might use some of the old furniture from Maisie's Ice Cream Parlor, but that'll be the only thing they save. It'll be a brand new room that they have that they're building on the hotel. But yeah. It is funny, when it came down to it, Maisie's Ice Cream Parlor was the one that got the most people that said, don't tear it down. They had to build a little inn on the property, which is why they decided to go on and save a piece, because they could placate preservationists while they were meeting their commitment. But we insisted that they keep the ice cream parlor and a hotel. So they will. No, you can walk right in, and the lobby's going to have some of the pictures from the hotel, so you'll be able to look at that and go to the ice cream parlor. You're welcome.
Were there any natural springs on the property?
Yes, there is. A natural spring actually runs under the Intercoastal Waterway. So they had a long walkway, and they had, at the end of the dock, that's where they pulled up the fresh water. So the hotel was actually fed by its own, it was completely self-sustained with its own fresh water. It had its own generator for the electricity. It had everything by itself until when the World War II came and the soldiers were occupying it. They were the ones who demanded that we get city water and city electricity, and that's when everything was closed off, is in the 1942. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Any thoughts about where the displaced ghost went?
Where the displaced ghost went? I've got a few ideas. Actually, it'll be very interesting because it depends on what you believe. Some believe that they're attached to a particular building, and if that's the case, unless they go with some of the floorboards that went elsewhere, they'll be gone. Some people will say that that'll break the cycle, and so they'll cross into the light. Other people will say they're attached to the ground. They see what was there, where, you know, if nothing that we see is still there. Other people say they're going to be there and they're going to be quite confused, and so there's going to be a few upset people. So that has yet to be determined what's going to happen. There really are a lot of stories about that, and I'm going to have some fun with it. Well, thank you very much for coming. I do so appreciate your coming. Thank you. Thank you very much.